There are moments in life when everything feels ordinary, and yet something deep inside whispers that the ordinary is only a surface. You wake up, follow your routine, speak with people, and go through the same motions as yesterday. But sometimes a strange awareness appears in your heart. It feels as though someone is closer than you realize. Not far away in some distant heaven, not hidden beyond the stars, but near watching, waiting, and preparing a moment that would change everything. Many people imagine divine encounters as loud and dramatic, filled with thunder and sudden miracles. Yet often the most powerful movements of heaven begin quietly. They begin in silence, in reflection, in a sudden sense that life is not random. The world around you continues as usual, but inside something shifts. It is as if a door you never noticed before has begun to open. This is the mystery many overlook. The arrival is not only a future event, it is personal. It moves closer to your life, your choices, your thoughts, and your heart. When people think about divine intervention, they usually picture it happening somewhere else, to someone else, at another time. But the truth is far more intimate. The moment draws nearer to you specifically. You may not see signs in the sky, you may not hear voices in the wind. Yet the subtle sense remains that something important is approaching your life. Perhaps it comes through a sudden realization about your purpose. Perhaps it appears through a challenge that forces you to change. Or maybe it arrives through a quiet conviction that you are not alone in this journey. The world teaches us to look for greatness in loud events and public victories, but the deeper story of life unfolds quietly, within hearts and souls. And when the moment finally arrives, many will realize it had been approaching all along softly, patiently, and personally. The truth is simple but profound. The present you have been searching for is not distant. It is closer than you think. There are moments in life when everything seems completely ordinary, yet something deep inside quietly tells you that the ordinary is not the whole story. You wake up in the morning, follow the same routine, walk through the same streets, speak to the same people, and the world appears to move exactly as it did yesterday. Nothing seems unusual, nothing seems extraordinary, and yet somewhere within the quiet corners of your heart, a subtle awareness begins to stir. It feels as though something unseen is drawing nearer, something important, something deeply personal. It is not loud or dramatic. It does not announce itself with thunder or flashing signs in the sky. Instead, it arrives like a whisper that gently touches the soul and asks you to notice what you have long overlooked. Many people imagine that when heaven moves, it must be obvious and overwhelming. They expect great displays of power, sudden miracles, or unmistakable signs that force everyone to pay attention. But the deeper truth of life often moves in the opposite way. The most powerful moments do not always begin with noise. They begin with quiet awareness. They begin when a person suddenly senses that life is not merely a chain of random events. Something greater seems to be unfolding beneath the surface of ordinary days. You may notice it during a quiet moment when your mind becomes still. Perhaps you are walking alone, sitting in silence, or reflecting on your life after a long day. In that moment, an unusual thought may appear. It may feel like a gentle reminder that your life has meaning beyond what the world usually talks about. It may feel as if someone understands your story more deeply than you ever expected. This feeling can be difficult to explain, and many people try to ignore it. They push it aside because it interrupts the comfortable belief that everything is simple and predictable. Yet the feeling often returns. It appears again in moments of reflection, in sudden insights, or in the quiet voice of your conscience. Each time it appears, it carries the same message. Something important is drawing closer. The strange part is that this nearness does not always look the way people expect. It does not necessarily arrive through dramatic changes in the outside world. Sometimes the world around you remains exactly the same, while something inside you begins to shift. Your perspective begins to change. The questions you ask become deeper. The things that once seemed important may begin to feel empty, while the things you once ignored start to feel meaningful. You begin to notice patterns you never saw before. Certain words, messages, or moments appear at just the right time. Conversations suddenly speak directly to situations in your life. Thoughts appear in your mind that challenge you to look at yourself honestly. And slowly, a quiet realization begins to grow. Perhaps none of this is accidental. There is something deeply personal about this experience. It is not only about the world as a whole, it is about your life specifically. The sense of nearness seems directed toward you, as if someone understands your struggles, your fears, and your hopes in ways no human ever fully could. The awareness grows that you are not simply another face in a crowded world. Your story matters more than you once believed. Many people spend years searching for meaning in distant places. They look for answers in achievements, recognition, wealth, or endless distractions. For a while, those things may seem satisfying. They provide excitement, attention, and temporary fulfillment. But eventually, a quiet emptiness begins to appear. The heart starts asking questions that success alone cannot answer. Why do I feel that something is missing? Why does the soul continue searching even after reaching what the world calls success? Why does the heart still long for something deeper? These questions often mark the beginning of awareness. They reveal that the human soul was never meant to be satisfied by shallow things alone. There is a deeper connection we were created to recognize, and when that connection begins to awaken, life starts to look different. Suddenly, the ordinary world begins to feel filled with hidden meaning. The silence becomes more powerful than noise. The quiet moments become more valuable than constant distraction. A person begins to realize that the most important things in life are not always visible to the eyes. And somewhere in that growing awareness comes a profound understanding. The presence you thought was distant may actually be very near, not distant beyond the stars, not hidden in some unreachable place, but quietly present, watching the story of your life unfold with patience and understanding. The nearness is gentle, never forcing itself upon you. It waits for recognition. It waits for the moment when your heart becomes still enough to notice it. And when that moment arrives, life begins to change in ways that are difficult to ignore. You begin to realize that the quiet whisper within you was never meaningless. It was an invitation to see beyond the surface of life and recognize that something greater has always been closer than you imagined. There are moments in life when something happens that feels strangely precise, as if it arrived at exactly the right time. A sentence spoken by someone unexpectedly touches the deepest part of your thoughts. A message you come across seems to describe your situation with surprising accuracy. A thought appears in your mind that feels clearer and wiser than your usual thinking. At first, these moments may seem like coincidences, yet when they happen repeatedly, a quiet question begins to rise in the mind. What if they are not coincidences at all? Most people move through life assuming that everything happens by chance. They believe their path is shaped by random events, accidental meetings, and unpredictable outcomes. But deep inside the human heart, there is often a resistance to that idea. Something within us senses that our lives may not be as random as they appear. There is a feeling that someone understands the details of our lives more deeply than we understand them ourselves. This awareness usually begins very quietly. It does not appear as a loud command or an overwhelming revelation. Instead, it often arrives as a gentle awareness that certain moments carry unusual meaning. A conversation suddenly answers a question you were struggling with privately. A challenge appears that forces you to grow in ways you never expected. A reminder shows up that pushes you to reconsider the direction of your life. When these moments happen, people often react in different ways. Some ignore them completely, quickly returning to their normal routines and distractions. Others feel curious but uncertain, unsure of what the experience might mean. And then there are those who pause long enough to consider the possibility that something deeper is taking place. For those who begin to notice these patterns, life slowly starts to look different. What once seemed like random events begins to form a kind of quiet guidance. The struggles that once felt pointless begin to reveal lessons hidden inside them. The delays that once seemed frustrating begin to show unexpected wisdom. Even painful experiences sometimes carry a strange sense of purpose. It is in these moments that the idea of a personal call begins to emerge. The realization forms that life is not simply about surviving, earning, and passing time until the years disappear. Instead, there is a deeper invitation unfolding within each person's story. It is as though a voice beyond ordinary understanding is gently reaching toward the human heart. The remarkable part of this call is how personal it feels. It does not speak to humanity as a distant crowd. It speaks to individuals. It touches the private thoughts that no one else hears. It addresses the hidden struggles that people often hide from the world. It knows the fears, the regrets, the hopes, and the questions that exist within each person's mind. Because of this, the call often feels surprisingly direct. A person may suddenly feel that certain choices in life carry greater weight than they once believed. Decisions that once seemed small begin to feel significant. Words spoken to others begin to matter more deeply. Actions that once felt harmless may begin to feel uncomfortable when viewed through a clearer sense of truth. This growing awareness can be both comforting and unsettling. On one hand, it reveals that your life has meaning and direction beyond random chance. On the other hand, it also reveals that you are responsible for how you respond to that meaning. Many people struggle with this moment. It is easier to believe that nothing truly matters beyond immediate pleasure of temporary success. It is easier to imagine that life is simply a sequence of accidents with no greater purpose behind it. But once a person senses that their life is being gently guided towards something meaningful, that comfortable illusion becomes harder to maintain. Instead, a new perspective begins to develop. The individual starts to see life as a story rather than a collection of unrelated events. Every chapter carries lessons. Every challenge shapes character. Every opportunity invites a response. And within this unfolding story, the sense of a personal invitation grows stronger. It is not a demand or a force. It does not overwhelm the human will. Instead, it respects freedom while quietly urging the soul to move toward truth. It invites honesty, humility, and reflection. It encourages a person to look beyond the surface of their life and consider what truly matters in the long run. The world often teaches people to measure success through wealth, recognition, or influence. Yet the personal call speaks about deeper things. It speaks about integrity when no one is watching. It speaks about compassion toward those who cannot repay kindness. It speaks about courage to choose what is right, even when it is difficult. Over time, those who listen carefully begin to notice that the call never completely disappears. Even when ignored, it returns. Even when pushed aside, it quietly waits. It appears again in unexpected moments, gently reminding the heart that life carries greater purpose than the world usually acknowledges. And slowly, a powerful realization begins to grow within the soul. The voice that calls is not distant. The presence behind that invitation is not far away. It is near enough to understand every detail of your journey, every question you carry, and every decision you will face. This is when the message becomes impossible to ignore. The call is not general. It is not vague. It is deeply personal. It reaches into your specific life, your unique story, and your future yet to unfold. And when a person truly understands that their life is being addressed in such a direct and personal way, they begin to realize something profound. The one who calls is not waiting somewhere far in the distance. The call itself is evidence that the presence behind it has already drawn very near. One of the most common beliefs people carry throughout life is the idea that the divine is distant. Many imagine a vast separation between heaven and earth, as though the Creator exists somewhere unimaginably far away, watching the world from a remote place beyond time and space. In this view, the divine presence feels unreachable, hidden behind galaxies and beyond the limits of human understanding. Because of this belief, people often assume that if the divine ever chose to act, it would require some dramatic interruption of the natural world, something so overwhelming that no one could possibly ignore it. But what if the distance people imagine is not real at all? What if the sense of separation comes not from physical space, but from the condition of the human heart? The idea that the divine is far away may feel convincing, yet it may simply be the result of how easily the human mind becomes distracted, overwhelmed, or absorbed by the noise of daily life. When the mind is constantly filled with activity, entertainment, worries, and ambitions, The deeper realities of life often fade quietly into the background. In many ways, the illusion of distance is created by the endless distractions that surround us. Modern life rarely allows the mind to rest. There is always something demanding attention: screens, voices, opinions, news, responsibilities, and countless small concerns. These things fill every empty moment, leaving very little space for reflection. When a person lives in constant noise, it becomes difficult to notice the quiet truths that exist beneath the surface of life. Yet, when a person steps away from the noise, even briefly, something remarkable can begin to happen. Silence has a way of revealing things that distraction hides. When the mind becomes still, thoughts begin to settle. Questions that were once ignored slowly rise to the surface. A person may begin to recognize feelings they have been avoiding or truths they have been overlooking. It is often in these quiet moments that people start to sense that the divine presence may not be distant after all. Instead of feeling far away, it begins to feel closer than expected, almost as though it has been quietly present all along. The realization can feel surprising at first because it challenges a belief that many people have carried for most of their lives. The truth is that humans are often poor at noticing what is closest to them. We search endlessly for meaning in distant places while overlooking the quiet voice that already exists within us. The conscience, for example, is one of the most familiar yet mysterious parts of human experience. Nearly every person has felt it at some point, the inner awareness that gently warns when something is wrong or encourages when something is right. It speaks without sound, yet its message is often unmistakable. Some people treat this inner voice as nothing more than a psychological reaction shaped by culture or upbringing. But even when people try to explain it away, the voice itself does not disappear. It continues to guide, correct, and remind, often in ways that feel wiser than our immediate desires. It has a strange authority that seems deeper than our temporary moods or impulses. If a person reflects honestly, they may begin to wonder where this voice comes from and why it carries such clarity. Why does it feel as though something within us knows the difference between truth and deception, kindness and cruelty, courage and cowardice? Why does ignoring this voice often lead to regret, while listening to it brings a quiet sense of peace? These questions begin to weaken the illusion of distance. The more a person reflects on the inner workings of the human soul, the harder it becomes to believe that everything meaningful in life is purely accidental. Instead, a different possibility begins to appear. The divine presence may be closer to human life than we ever imagined, not distant beyond the reach of thought, but quietly involved in the moral and spiritual fabric of existence. Not hidden behind the edge of the universe, but near enough to influence the conscience, inspire wisdom, and awaken the desire for truth. When this realization begins to take shape, it changes the way a person sees the world. The universe no longer appears empty or indifferent. Instead, it begins to feel purposeful and alive with meaning. The moments of conviction, inspiration, and moral clarity begin to look less like random mental events and more like signs of a deeper presence, gently guiding human hearts. This does not mean that the divine presence forces itself upon people or removes their freedom. In fact, the nearness of the divine often remains subtle, allowing each person the choice of whether to recognize it or ignore it. Some continue living as though nothing has changed, pushing away any thoughts that challenge their sense of independence. Others become curious and begin exploring the possibility that their life is connected to something far greater than they once believed. But once the illusion of distance begins to fade, it is difficult to return completely to the old perspective. A person who has glimpsed the possibility of nearness starts to notice hints of it everywhere, in moments of unexpected wisdom, in the beauty of the natural world, in acts of compassion, and in the persistent longing within the human heart for truth and meaning. Gradually, the realization grows stronger. The divine presence is not hidden by space, but by perception. It is not far away, but quietly near, waiting for the moment when a person becomes aware enough to recognize it. And when that awareness finally settles into the heart, the greatest surprise of all begins to unfold. The presence that once seemed unreachable suddenly feels closer than anything else in existence, closer than our fears, closer than our doubts, and closer than we ever imagined possible. There are certain moments in life when something inside a person begins to awaken in a way that cannot easily be ignored. For a long time, everything may have felt ordinary and predictable. Days follow the same pattern, people chase the same goals, and the world continues moving in familiar circles. Many individuals spend years focusing only on what is directly in front of them: work, responsibilities, ambitions, and the endless tasks that fill everyday life. During that time, it is easy to believe that life is simply about moving from one stage to the next, collecting experiences, achieving goals, and eventually fading into memory like countless generations before. Yet deep within the human soul, there is often a quiet restlessness that refuses to disappear completely. It may remain hidden for years beneath the surface of routine, but it is rarely gone forever. Sometimes it appears late at night when everything becomes silent and the mind finally has room to think. Sometimes it appears during moments of disappointment when achievements fail to bring the satisfaction that was expected. And sometimes it arrives unexpectedly through a question that suddenly seems impossible to ignore. A person may suddenly wonder why certain things matter so deeply. Why do people long for meaning even when their basic needs are already met? Why does the human heart search for truth, purpose, and belonging in ways that go far beyond survival? These questions often appear quietly at first, but once they begin to grow, they have a way of changing how a person sees the world. For many people, the turning point begins with the realization that the life they have been living may only be part of a much larger story. The goals that once seemed so important begin to feel strangely incomplete. Success, recognition, comfort, and approval may still have value, but they no longer satisfy the deeper hunger of the soul. It becomes clear that something more meaningful must exist beyond the surface of daily existence. This realization can feel unsettling because it challenges the familiar structure of life. For years, a person may have trusted certain assumptions about what matters most. They may have believed that happiness would come naturally once certain achievements were reached, yet when those achievements finally arrive, the expected fulfillment does not always follow. Instead, a quiet question appears again: is this really all there is? That question has the power to open a door within the mind. Once it is asked sincerely, it often leads to deeper reflection. A person begins to examine their own life more honestly. They start noticing patterns in their decisions, their relationships, and their motivation. Things that once seemed insignificant suddenly carry new meaning. Moments from the past may begin to look different when viewed through this new awareness. Experiences that once felt random may now appear like lessons that were guiding the person toward greater understanding. Difficult seasons that once seemed unfair may reveal hidden growth that could not have happened any other way. As this reflection deepens, the idea begins to form that life may not be as accidental as it once appeared. The story of a person's life may actually be moving towards something intentional. The struggles, questions, and turning points may all be shaping the soul for a moment of recognition. That moment often arrives quietly rather than dramatically. It may come during a simple conversation that suddenly carries unexpected truth. It may come while reading words that seem to speak directly to the heart. It may appear while observing the beauty and order of the world in a way that awakens a deep sense of wonder. When that moment arrives, the realization begins to settle into the mind with surprising clarity. Perhaps the search for meaning was never one-sided. Perhaps the human soul has been responding to something that has been reaching toward it all along. This realization can feel both humbling and powerful at the same time. Humbling because it reveals that life is not entirely under human control. Powerful because it shows that every person is part of a story far greater than they imagine. The awareness grows that truth itself has a way of pursuing the human heart. Even when people try to ignore it, it quietly returns. It appears in the voice of conscience, in the longing for justice, in the desire for forgiveness, and in the deep sense that love and goodness carry a value that cannot be explained by mere survival. Once a person begins to see these things clearly, it becomes difficult to pretend that life is only a collection of random experiences. The deeper pattern becomes impossible to ignore. Every human life seems to be moving toward a moment of understanding when the illusions of the world begin to fade and something more permanent becomes visible. This is the moment of realization. It is the point when a person begins to see themselves honestly and recognizes the deeper meaning woven through their life. It is the moment when truth stops feeling like a distant idea and begins to feel like a living presence. And when that realization truly settles into the heart, something remarkable begins to happen. The search for meaning is no longer driven by confusion or desperation. Instead, it becomes a response to something that has already begun to reveal itself. The person starts to understand that the awakening of their soul was not an accident. The questions that disturbed their comfort were not meaningless. They were invitations to see reality more clearly. And in that clarity, a powerful truth begins to shine through the noise of the world. The presence they once thought was distant has been patiently drawing nearer all along, waiting for the moment when their eyes would finally open and recognize it. As you move forward from this moment, remember that the greatest turning points in life rarely announce themselves with noise or spectacle. They arrive quietly, often disguised as a simple realization, a question that refuses to fade, or a moment when the heart suddenly becomes aware of something deeper than the world usually notices. What once seemed ordinary begins to reveal a hidden significance, and the story of your life no longer feels random or directionless. Perhaps for a long time you believed that meaning was something you had to chase across the distant horizon. Perhaps you thought the answers to life's deepest questions were far away, hidden somewhere beyond your reach. But what if the truth is much closer than that? What if the presence you have been searching for has already been moving gently through the moments of your life, guiding you through lessons, questions, and quiet awakening? Every reflection you have had, every restless thought that pushed you to look deeper, every moment when your conscience spoke clearly, none of it was meaningless. Those moments were invitations. They were reminders that life is more than a sequence of passing days. They were signs that your story is connected to something far greater than you once imagined. The world may continue to move at its usual pace, filled with noise, distractions, and endless demands for attention. Many people will continue living as though nothing greater is unfolding. But once a person begins to see beyond the surface, it becomes impossible to completely return to the old way of thinking. Awareness changes everything. So the question is no longer whether something meaningful is approaching your life. The real question is how you will respond when you realize how close it truly is. Will you ignore the quiet call and return to distraction? Or will you allow your heart to remain open to the truth that has been patiently revealing itself? Because the most powerful encounters are not always sudden or dramatic. Sometimes they unfold slowly, drawing nearer step by step, until the moment arrives when everything becomes clear. And when that moment finally comes, you may look back and realize that the signs were always there. The quiet reminders, the inner voice, the unexpected awakenings, they were all pointing toward the same truth. He was never distant. He was never unaware of your story. He was always moving closer. And now, the moment of recognition may be nearer than you ever imagined.